Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My colleagues and I are here in the Rabbi Samuel Chill Sanctuary on Wednesday afternoon, April 9th, and this is showing on Shabbat Hagadol, April 12th, the morning where that night, tonight, Saturday night, is going to be our first Seder. So our question for conversation today is, can one person change the world? Can you change the world? Can I change the world? Can the people who are having Seders tonight be inspired by the conversations and experience of your Seder table to go out and change the world? And our proof text is going to come from the tractate Sanhedrin. So just a little bit of background about Sanhedrin before we jump into our content. The word Sanhedrin means the body in ancient Israel that was composed of 71 leaders of ancient Israel that was kind of a judicial body that was responsible for administering justice. The Torah tells us, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And the book of Deuteronomy has a lot of passages about the kinds of human officials, judges, and magistrates that are responsible for creating and sustaining a just society. And Sanhedrin was kind of the Supreme Court of ancient Israel. And the tractate Sanhedrin talks about justice and how do you administer it. And there's 10 chapters about the officials and the judges and the procedures and the protocols and the evidentiary rules that would help ancient Israel, the Jewish people, fulfill justice, justice shall you pursue. And then the 11th chapter, from which our teaching comes, called Hachelek, does not deal with justice, but deals with other worldly affairs, specifically the world to come, olam haba, and techiyat hameitim, the resurrection of the dead. And I think the connection is that justice is very hard to come by and very imperfectly attained. And what is the relief or the remedy for people who live in unjust times? Let's say you are a Russian soldier or a Ukrainian soldier, or let's say an Israeli or a Gazan, or anybody throughout human history who lived in World War I in the trenches, or World War II, or the 6 million, or the slaves that we think about tonight. You were born as a slave and lived as a slave and died as a slave, and you didn't get justice. Justice is imperfectly attained. What's the redress for that? And so the tractate on justice ends with a world to come, and it ends with talking about resurrection of the dead. Maybe in the next world, we'll get the justice we didn't get in this world. At the very end of the tractate on justice, at the end of Sanhedrin, the Talmud is going to ask this question, can one person change the world? And what we're going to see when we get into the content is it has a 1-2 move. The last piece is going to be propositional truth about one person. A great tzaddik can change the world for the good, and a great rasha, a wicked person, can change the world for the bad. A wicked person radiates all kinds of wicked energy. A person who's destructive and full of fury and anger just emanates destruction and fury and anger. And conversely, a good person radiates grace, and that seems to be, gives us categories, and it seems to be that the message is, if you're a tzaddik, you can change the world for the good. And if you're a rasha, you can change the world for the bad. But then, right before that dry propositional truth, the Talmud presents us with the figure of Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi, who of course is going to make an appearance at all of our Seder tables tonight. We'll all have a cup of Elijah. We'll all rise and sing Eliyahu Hanavi. We'll all tell our children that Eliyahu is coming into our Seder. And the question is, does Eliyahu Hanavi fit either category, tzaddik or rasha? And does he fit that category? And if he doesn't, and spoiler alert, he doesn't. He's a super complicated figure, both in the Bible, super complicated, and in the Talmud, even in this passage, a story super complicated. He doesn't seem to fit either category. What does that do to the teaching? And what's the message of the Talmud on whether we can change the world? So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה. וערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולמדי תורתך לשמה,
Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah li'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So I want to jump into our content with the very last paragraph of tractate Sanhedrin. It's 113 pages. This is the last piece, and it's on our question about a good and a bad person changing the world. So, Eliza, if you'll pick up on the second column where it says the rabbis taught in a baraita, and just read it out. Page 3 of the handout.
Thank you. The rabbis taught in a baraita, when a wicked person comes to the world, divine anger comes to the world. As it is stated, with the coming of a wicked person comes derision too, and with shamefulness, disgrace. When a wicked person is lost from the world, i.e., when he dies, good fortune comes to the world. As it is stated, when the wicked perish, there is joy. On the other hand, when a righteous person departs from the world, misfortune comes to the world. As it is stated, the righteous man has perished, and no man takes to heart. And the men of kindness are gathered in without anyone understanding. That is because of the evil that the righteous man is taken. When a righteous person comes to the world, good fortune comes to the world. As it is stated, and he called his name Noach, saying, this one will bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands.
Okay, so what is, just at the simple pshat level, what is the Talmud in this complicated tractate, which deals with justice, saying about changing the world? What does it seem to be saying?
It feels like it's saying that each one of us affects the world, that our character has an impact on our surroundings. And if we're in it, it impacts the surroundings. And if we're not in it, it impacts the surroundings.
Right. And it also seems to be, how do you interpret the whole piece about, that we will call it an energy force field? When a wicked person comes to the world, divine anger comes into the world. And similarly, when a righteous person comes into the world, kind of a whole energy force field of grace comes into the world. What is the Talmud saying there?
I'm so curious to hear your read. It feels like, to me, I'm so intrigued by these categories, because I'm thinking about like a tiny baby. Like when you go to a baby naming, like you don't know anything of that tiny human's character. And so are we all entirely one category or another? Is this hyperbolic? Is this a real evaluation? It's a really interesting, and also, yes, I suppose in an experiment where you had all the variables remain the same and only one person enters, but the world is a constant evolving door of people coming in and people coming out, and the balance of good and the balance of evil. So it feels like if we're really taking this seriously, there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of factors.
Yeah, to me, the message is very clear here. What the Talmud is trying to teach us is basically, you do good in the world and the world will be a better place, and we will miss you once you are gone.
Right.
All right. That is basically the simple, teaching of this. But I was thinking, we don't need to talk about this now, but obviously it's so hard these days, in this day and age. Everywhere in the world you look, there are people who think somebody's good and people who think that the same person is evil. And how do you define those categories is really trouble.
Right. So let me just unpack that, Elias. Both of your points. Number one, the Talmud does use the category of tzaddik and rasha. A tzaddik is a righteous person through and through, and a rasha is a bad person through and through. And it absolutely does say that if you're a tzaddik and you do good, you change the world for the good. And if you're a rasha and you're bad, you change the world for the bad. And I think it does have this, and it seems to me reaching to say that our deeds have a cosmic consequence. It has it's beyond our dalat amot. And even your example, Eliza, about a baby. I mean, I find one of the most powerful things in the world. One of the most powerful things in the world is a baby at a shiva house. Because in a shiva house, there's been a death and there's sadness and brokenness. But when there's a baby or children, the laughter of a young generation just somehow changes the whole energy and the avirah of it, right? Right. So it is saying that. But then to your point, Elias, those categories of tzaddik and Russia, good and bad person. What does that mean in a world where the same person could be seen very differently? The same person could be seen as a tzaddik. The same person could be seen as a rasha, and both of those positions held with passionate conviction. So what do we do with that category? And is any one person really either one or the other? And what about the complexity and the layers of all humans?
The other thing I was going to say is that there are people that are really tzaddik. There are people that are really rasha. And then there's the 99.99% of the rest of us. So the question is the impact that one person can have on the world is powerful, but we don't know if it's going to be us, me individually, Elise individually, Eliza individually, you individually, or is it going to be a different person?
Right.
So most of the world is neither tzaddik nor rasha, and so the question is this tractate trying to get at the fact that there are only a few that will impact the world, people that are truly one category or the other.
Right. Thank you, Dan. So I want to just say, kind of build on your energy, which is that right before this closing paragraph, the story that the Talmud chooses to tell, and by the way, the reason I brought it to us in Shabbat Hagadol, or sometimes called Shabbat Haggadah, is because the story that the Talmud chooses to tell at the end of Sanhedrin is about Elijah, Eliyahu Hanavi. And there's a number of stories about Elijah in the Tanakh in 1 Kings 1, but the one that it's going to choose to focus on is the first chapter where Elijah makes an appearance on the pages of human history, which is 1 Kings 17. And in this story, Elijah does two things. The first thing is he declares a drought, right? And it's a drought that is painful. So this is the first paragraph of Elijah. This is where he enters the pages of human history. First time we hear about him. Elijah the Tishbite, an inhabitant of Gilead. I'm reading from page 5 of the handout, 1 Kings 17. Elijah the Tishbite, an inhabitant of Gilead, said to Ahab, who's the bad king, "As the Lord lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding." And then what happens is that there's no rain and there's no dew. And a society that is all of a sudden deprived of water suffers. So verse 7, after some time the wadi dried up because there was no rain in the whole land. And then God says to him, so his first move is to create drought. And presumably a lot of innocent people are going to suffer because there's no water. That's Eliyahu Hanavi. That's his first move, to create drought. And then the rest of the story, and this is what the Talmud's going to deal with, which is God sends him to a widow. The widow, doesn't have a husband, has a son, and he goes to this widow at God's instance, and they scrounge up a little bit of food to eat and drink. And then there's the story where Elijah resurrects the dead. So Elias, you want to pick up on page 6 of the handout. After a while, this is the first nice story of Elijah, verse 17. Yes.
After a while, the son of the mistress of the house fell sick, and his illness grew worse, until he had no breath left in him. She said to Elijah, "What harm have I done you, O man of God, that you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son? Give me the boy," he said to her. And taking him from her arms, he carried him to the upper chamber where he was staying, and laid him down on his bed. He cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord my God, will you bring calamity upon the widow whose guest I am, and let her son die?" Then he stretched out over the child 3 times, and cried out to the Lord, saying, "O Lord my God, let this child's life return to his body." The Lord heard Elijah's plea. The child's life returned to his body, and he revived. Elijah picked up the child and brought him down from the upper room into the main room and gave him to his mother. "See," said Elijah, "your son is alive." And the woman answered Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the Lord that the word of the Lord is truly in your mouth.
So in the first chapter of the Elijah story in the Bible, and the Talmud's going to pick this up, he does two things. He decrees drought for everybody, no rain, no dew, a lot of suffering for that time, and he revives the dead. He revives the single child. He does a great act of kindness for the child and also for his mother. So now I want to use the categories of the Talmud. How would you describe the moral conduct of Elijah here? I mean, is he tzaddik? Is he a rasha? What comes up for you when you think about that? And the Talmud itself is forcing these questions because it juxtaposes this very layered figure of Elijah, who causes drought and who resurrects the dead, onto this category of tzaddik and rasha. That's the next thing, that the tzaddik saves the world, the rasha ruins the world. What meaning do you make out of all this? Anyone?
Well, what's really most confusing to me is how Elijah can make it stop raining and make the dew disappear.
Right.
Only God should be able to do that. So he's a different sort of a prophet. He's not doing God's bidding. He seems to be doing his own bidding.
Right.
And that itself is really interesting. So if that is the case, as it seems to be from the Peshat of the text, that seems to be more of an act of rasha. Not totally, though, because he is trying to punish Ahab.
Right.
Ahab. So he's punishing Ahab by punishing the whole people. And that's a layered, complex thing, and then saving the one life. The Torah teaches us, the world that saving one life saves the entire world. So here he has saved the one life of the child, saving the entire world simultaneously. So is he rasha or tzaddik? Yes. Beautiful Jewish answer.
So I think that also we talked about this many times, that we human beings are complex and complicated human people, and that we can have within ourselves good and evil, right? This is also a little bit of an extreme. We don't have the superpowers to cure somebody who has been dead, neither the ability of bring drought to everybody. But I think, in much smaller scales, we all are capable of bad and good things, and that doesn't qualify us to either fully, tzaddik or rasha.
So then the question is going to be, exactly, then the question is, what is the message? Is the Talmud subverting its final teaching is a tzaddik can save the world and a rasha can ruin the world? And I remember when I first got to Temple Manual in the summer of 1997, and I saw Janet Chill, she told me it's the stories people remember. Dry propositional truth people don't remember. It's the stories they remember. And here the story that the Talmud offers us is Elijah in chapter 17, and we all seem to align around the fact that he's neither tzaddik nor rasha, but just a complicated human. By the way, that's not even the most famous story about Elijah. The most famous story of Elijah, which is in the next chapter or two, is he sees that the Israelites are not serving the true God. They're serving the false god Baal. He challenges the people to come to the top of Mount Carmel. He challenges the false prophets of Baal. Can you cause a fire by calling upon your God? They can't. And then he calls upon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God sends a fire. All the people see this and say, Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim, which is what we say at the end of Ne'ilah. And then the coda of the story is Elijah slaughters all the false prophets. So he gets the people to believe in the true God, and he's a mass terrorist. He slaughters the false prophets at the same time. So he's so layered. And the question I want to ask us to think about then is, how do we put all this together? Elisa has something to say.
Well, it's so layered, and also in that story, you're not supposed to offer sacrifices outside of the mikdash, and he just violates every principle, and God seems to be like, oh well, some boys are like that. But I think also in this story, what's so painful about this story is that here he's with one widow who barely has enough food to make it by, and he's like, make me a cake and I'll make you this miracle. Presumably every other house around him is also starving and also struggling, and he's not there.
Right.
And then there's this scene of saving this young man is so bizarro and so weirdly sexual and questionable and gross. And okay, but like it's really messy. And he looks so bad in both of these stories in really problematic ways. And I think the biggest principle for me, the biggest takeaway, and what's so interesting is after all of this, the Talmud comes back and says, what's the definition of a rasha? Someone who steals. Right? The category of a rasha is someone who takes something that is not theirs. He fits the bill. Taking the water that is not his, taking resources away, slaughtering lives.
And yet we're inviting him to the Seders.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you.
He's Teku. He has the ability to solve things we can't
Right.
solve.
So I want to ask you to, and then there's just one last piece which you don't have to read, but in the Talmud, the Talmud itself is going to tell a story. It's not in the Tanakh, it's just a Talmudic story, but it also has a Seder tie-in. Rabbi Jose, the Galilean that we know from Maxwell House, Rabbi Jose says that Elijah, the prophet, is a kaptan, and a kaptan is somebody who's very irascible and cantankerous and cannot take any criticism. And the story in the text that we don't have to read, but it's in there if you want to read it on your own, is that Rabbi Jose says to Elijah, hey, Elijah, you kind of have thin skin. Whenever anybody offers you a critique, you kind of recoil. And what Elijah does is he just stops talking to him for a number of days. And then a number of days later, he comes back to Rabbi Jose and says, and Rabbi Jose says, oh, Elijah, so good to see you again. Where did you go and why did you leave? And Elijah says, you said something critical of me, so I don't want anything to do with you. And that he's a kaptan. And he doesn't try to teshuva, he just says, that's who I am. So here's my question. So the Talmud does these two things at the end of this tractate on justice, Sanhedrin. It presents us with this multiply layered, flawed, problematic Elijah, who, by the way, if I didn't say it yet, is coming to your Seder tonight. Yeah. And who is also, by the way, think about a Brit Milah, the Kisei Shel Eliyahu, the seat of redemption. At Eder's bris, there was the Kisei Shel Eliyahu, this very flawed figure, right?
Havdalah.
And Havdalah every Shabbat. So he's very multiply layered and flawed and multiply invited to all of our events. And then after introducing him and all of his complexity, it gives us this category about saving the world or ruining the world based on your conduct. So how do you put all this together? What does the message seem to be? Is the Talmud, does the story of the Talmud about Elijah subvert the message of the story about changing the world or not? How do you see these pieces fitting together?
But he doesn't, he's a complicated character also because he doesn't leave the world. It's such an interesting category that he lives on. He's not leaving. His impact on the world is not changed. I'm also just struck by the categories of tzaddik and rasha, of good and evil, actually have nothing to do with what you do. It's your birth and your death, and people at the beginning and ends of their lives are not doing a whole lot.
Why do you say it has nothing to do with what you do?
If this whole principle that when a child is born, there's rejoicing and blessings and goodness that comes forward, okay, that's lovely, but Eder's now almost 2 and he's just starting to talk. He's not doing anything.
Right.
He's certainly not having an action. He's doing lots of things, many of them very impish, but his actions aren't having a big impact on the world around him.
Right, but you're interpreting. I don't interpret the passage as saying that you're designated at birth at all. It says when a person comes into the world, you're I think interpreting it, if I hear you correctly, as saying that when you come into the world, the Talmud is labeling you as tzaddik for rasha. I don't interpret that way. I think the Talmud is saying when a person comes into the world, and they emerge into who they are, and if they are tzaddik, one thing, and if they are rasha, one thing. But the problem is that to me, the category it doesn't take in the complexity of us layered humans. Elias, what's your read?
I have a little bit of a different twist. So I in this day and age, it's very hard to believe and to see the blurry line between what is a tzaddik and a rasha.
Right.
Obviously, if you go out on the street and you start shooting people, it's clear. But
right.
In so many other occasions, it's not. So my learning from this, that also is a little twist, and you don't have to agree, is that rasha, if there is such a category as a rasha, can also change the world for good. Because if Elijah, after what he does in Baal, all right, and based on your description, what the horrible things he does, even taking advantage of a widow, he's able to save one life because he saved the life of a child.
Right.
And we don't know what happened to that child, if he became a leader in the country or whatever. He changed the world a little bit, not necessarily being good.
Well, and I will, and obviously, the elephant in the room is politics, so we're not talking politics. But I will tell you this: that Shira and I have a number of friends who are Israelis, who are center-left Israelis. They're center-left Israelis. They're not right-wing at all. And when you ask them about our president, they say they think he is as close to the Messiah as has happened, because their view is the reason that the hostages who got released recently was him, not Israel's leader, but America's leader. And therefore, there are families in Israel tonight who will be reunited around the Seder table, where otherwise they would have been stuck in the hell of Gaza tunnels. And that is entirely because of him, our leader. And therefore, they who are not right-wing, they think he is the Messiah. So I want to come back. I think that the Talmud ends up giving us categories that are not very helpful, because Elijah is a complicated person. Every person is a complicated person. We're complicated people. So it suggests to me something about our Seders tonight, which is that whoever you have around your table, like we ourselves, are a mixed lot. And therefore, to me, the lesson of all of this is two things that are hard to hold at the same time. One, to have humility, and to be able to listen, and to be able to dan chavero lachav zechut, see the good in everybody, because Elijah, who did a lot of bad, also did a lot of good, because people who do a lot of bad also do a lot of good. How can we dan chavero lachav zechut, judge everybody in the light most favorable? How can we listen? How can we learn? How can we be humble? How do we do all that? That flows from the mixed categories. And here's the next thing, though. How do we not fall into total relativism, wishy-washiness? I'm okay, you're okay, we're all okay, and therefore everything's okay. How do we have humility, listening, and learning without being wishy-washy? How do we stand for our own values and advance them with courage and confidence and conviction and clarity, even at the same time that we're open to the wisdom and the values of people who see the world very differently? That, to me, is the ultimate resonance of the end of Sanhedrin. Shabbat Shalom, and have a wonderful Chag Kasher V'Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Sameach.